So I'll present our work, not a coincidence, Sub-Quadratic Asynchronous Byzantine Agreement with High Probability, with as Edith says, is a joint work with Edith, which is my advisor, and Sasha, which is currently working for Novi. And I'll start with a brief overview of what is consensus from the beginning for some who may not know, because the whole work is aiming at this problem. So consensus 101, the consensus problem, it basically requires to reach agreement among a set of processes. So I like to think about it as people trying to make a decision together. It's easier for me to detach it from the computer science word and think about it as an actual problem we all meet in life. So for example, we should ask ourselves, what topping should we put on our pizza? So we have these 4 nice emojis. One crazy suggests pineapple, another suggests extra cheese, and etc., etc. And what we want to achieve is to reach an agreement on what would be on the pizza. For example, we all agree to put hot pepper on our pizza. So let's make it a bit more formal. We have a set of processes, a closed set of processes and processes, where each process PI has some input value, for example, what it wants to put on its pizza. And at the end, everyone has a decision of what he decided. And we want the following properties to hold. So the first one is validity, which means that if all processes, let's say all emojis, are suggesting to put bacon on the pizza, then we must decide to put bacon. We cannot decide to put something else. Second one is quite obvious, agreement. So no 2 processes can decide someone else. We should all decide either we go with extra cheese or we put on pepper, but no, we cannot split the decision. And termination, so we want every process eventually to decide on the topping. And if you think about it, it's quite trivial to succeed getting any subset of 2 properties of those, but achieving all 3 is a bit more subtle problem. I'll just say now, if you have any questions, please feel free to stop and ask. The faculty didn't give any strict instruction on how the seminar should go, so feel free to stop me at any time. So this problem called consensus can be looked at in various models. So for example, one property we should look at is, are we solving it using message passing or shared memory? So shared memory means we have some sort of memory we can all have access to. We can write things in register, read from them, but we don't talk directly with each other. We use some sort of outsource to communicate. While message passing is, as one can guess, is sending message. So I'm Shir, I want to send message to Edith and say, hey Edith, let's, what do you think about putting bacon on our pizza? Another model we can discuss is how a process may fail. So of course, in optimistic case, no one fails. We can all go on with our life and solve it quite easily. And the first failure we can discuss is crash failures or crash faults, which means that, for example, this crazy emoji here can one day fall asleep and we will never hear from him again. Okay, so for example, if we're talking about computers, one could shut off his computers. We don't know if he's just waiting to decide, he's still negotiating with his girlfriend on the topping, or he will not respond in the future as well. And the other fault is Byzantine fault, which is a bit more harder to handle. And this means that eventually what do we have? We have a set of processes following some sort of protocol, right? So all nodes act upon the protocol, they do as they should, except for if they're Byzantine. So if they're Byzantine, they can decide to do whatever they want. They can decide to say, let's say in message passing, they can decide to tell this emoji that he wants extra cheese, and another emoji that he wants nothing on his pizza. Okay, so it's undefined. He can do arbitrary behavior, whatever he wants. He can ruin the game for us. And the last model I'll discuss is if we use synchrony assumption or asynchrony model. So synchrony assumptions means that we can have a known delay of messages. Say I send a message to Edith, and all the processes know that it will arrive at Edith within 5 minutes, or within 1 year, or within some certain bound that is known to all. On the other hand, asynchrony means that no one knows about the delay of messages. I know that the message will eventually be arrived at its destination, but I don't know when it will happen. So the model we'll discuss today is the model of message passing, Byzantine faults, and asynchrony, which is in a way the harder models of the list. And a known result, which is important to know, is the FLP result, which states that deterministic consensus is impossible it's impossible in a synchronous system, even if one process may crash, okay? Not even Byzantine. If one crash, we cannot solve deterministic consensus. So what is usually done, or the only way out, let's say, is settling for a randomized algorithm, which I'll soon define. So what we'll do, we'll focus on binary Byzantine agreements. So instead of choosing a topping for our pizza, we'll just decide if we want topping or we want it plain, and we'll solve it with high probability. As I said, I cannot solve it deterministically, so I'll have to settle on the probability to achieve the required properties. So I resume to the formal definition we saw before, but I adapt it to what we do. So now, as I said, we have correct processes and we have the Byzantine processes. So correct processes are the nice guys, the ones that follow the protocols. And we want that each correct process will propose a binary input value, such that the following properties we discussed, and I'll repeat on, are satisfied with high probability, which means I want them to be satisfied with probability that tends to 1 as n, the number of processes, goes to infinity. So of course, I cannot require anything for Byzantine processes, right? Because Byzantine processes may decide that he never stops, or he can decide on some value that were never suggested, or whatever he wants, he can do really. So I require that for validity, if all correct processes propose the same value v, then any correct process that decides on v. No two correct processes will decide differently, and every correct process will decide. Okay, so this close up the
Just a minute, Shir.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Can we go back to the previous slide?
Yes.
So the high probability guarantee stands with respect to all three requirements. I mean, each one of them may fail with a tiny probability. Termination, for example.
Exactly. So okay. Previous works, I'll let everyone know, previous work that try to circumvent FLP usually settle only on termination. So they, so validity and agreement can be called safety guarantees, and termination is liveness. So most protocols, most existing protocols always satisfy safety properties and suggest termination with probability 1. We settle on all properties in order to achieve our sub-quadratic communication.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So let's jump to our actual work. So the motivation is the Byzantine agreement is widely used in many large-scale systems, right? So we have Libra, Algorand, Hyperledger, all sorts of blockchains. I promised I'll use this word once. So it has many use cases in the real world. And in the real world, we, of course, we don't know the bound on the delay. We can assume it, but we don't know what will happen actually. So we want to be able to handle asynchrony, and we want a low communication complexity. And I'll start off with what we did. So the contribution of this paper is presenting the first sub-quadratic asynchronous Byzantine agreement with high probability. So we're not the first to solve sub-quadratic Byzantine agreement. This was done in Algorand, for example, but it was done for synchronous model, where the problem is a bit easier, and we'll discuss it later. But we also solve it for asynchronous Byzantine agreement and achieve order tilde of n, order complexity. And as I said, safety and liveness properties are guaranteed with high probability. So what is the model we discussed? I said it briefly. So we assume n processes, asynchronous time assumptions, and we can handle up to almost third of Byzantine processes. So we cannot do better than third. There's a lower bound about it, but we ourselves achieve almost third. We need this epsilon for our analysis later, and it's all that n is approximately 4.5f. Furthermore, we assume trusted PKI. So PKI, again, in a high level, means that every process has a set of a pair of private and public keys, so they can sign stuff, and it allows us to use VRF, which I'll soon describe. And another thing we discuss is the power of the adversary. So the adversary is the one that corrupts the Byzantine. It controls the schedule. So he's there to make our word as bad as it can. So we bound him in the following way. We say that he can use the content of a message M to schedule another message M prime, only if M causally precedes M prime. Okay, so also this will help us later in the analysis. So a main tool we are using is verifiable random function, or VRF. So what is VRF? It's a pseudo-random function, and it provides a proof of its correct computation. In simple words, I can think of someone picking out a random number along with the proof of that number, of the number you received. Let's say I get the number 3, and I can show everybody and prove everybody that I actually received 3. And I cannot regret and pick another card. Yes, I get a number and I'm stuck with it for this round. And another definition, and what we'll soon be implementing, is a shared coin with a success rate rho, which is a procedure executed by all correct processes, such that they all output the same bit B with probability at least rho, at least the success rate. So effectively, what we're trying to do, this VRF provides some source of local randomness, right? I picked a random number, a pseudo-random number, and I'm trying to create a shared randomness so that all correct processes use these VRFs in order to generate this random bit. Any questions so far before I move on? No, okay. So let's try to implement this shared coin. So at first, we'll do the following stuff. So this, I hope you see my mouse. This is the set of processes, and we have 2 communication phases, and it goes from left to right. So at first, every process here in the left column executes the VRF, and it obtains some random number, and it sends it to all other messages, to all other processes, sorry. And as in asynchronous protocols, we can't wait on a timeout because we don't know the delay of messages. So we need to wait for n minus f messages before we can move on. Why we can't wait for more than n minus f messages is because f of them might be faulty and may never respond again. We don't know. We can be sure how they'll hack the Byzantine processes. So what we do is we wait for n minus f messages. Then we pick the minimum value we heard of during the first phase. Okay, so let's say I heard 1, 2, and 3. I pick 1 as it's the minimum, and I sent this value again to all other processes in the second phase. Once again, I wait for n minus f messages, and then I return the least significant bit of the minimum value I heard of. Okay, so it's quite simple protocol. And let's see why is it working. So first we use the idea of a common core that was presented in the Hagit's book. And we see that—
Shir, there's a question in the chat. If N is common knowledge, is globally known.
Yeah, N is known by all. Yeah, thank you. I'm not looking at this at the chat all the time, so please let me know again if there's any questions. Okay, so the idea of common core. So we define a value, one of the initial N values, to be common if it reaches f+1 correct processes during the first phase. Okay, meaning that it reaches, it could have reached more, but at least f+1 of them are correct. And if a value is common, then in the second phase, because of the intersection of the f+1 correct processes and me waiting for n minus f processes in the second phase, at least one of the correct processes, this value will propagate it to all other processes, resulting in all common values reach all correct processes by the end of the second phase. And what we prove, and I won't show here today, but it's in the paper, is that using, if you remember the resilience, the f equals the third minus epsilon n, the exact epsilon is here to help us to bound the number of common values. Okay, so let's say I have a total of n initial values. If I could make the number of common values a function of n in some way, linear in n, then I can hopefully get the global minimum value to be one of the common values of the common values, meaning it will reach all correct processes. And then again, we have the delay adaptive adversary, which means that the adversary cannot decide who will be the common values. So he commits to the order of their arrivals at the first phase before he sees this randomness obtained by the processes. Okay, so what we hope to achieve, and what we do achieve actually, is that with the constant probability, the global minimum is common, and it will reach all correct processes, and they all decide on the significant bit on the global minimum. Any questions? I hear noises. No, okay. So the word complexity of this shared coin we just seen is two all-to-all communication phases. So it's resulting in a quadratic.
So again, we have a question in the chat.
How is pseudo-randomness crucial here? What prevents you from simply using randomness? So the best I can hope for is pseudo-randomness. I need a random value from each process along with the proof of this random. So I don't want anyone just to pick their own value, because in this case, Byzantine will be able to always suggest one and make sure it reaches all processes and biasing the coin. So we want the coin to be also unbiased. So with fair chances to both 1 and 1 and 0, sorry. Does it answer your questions? Great. So we achieve quadratic communication, which was a great coin, but doesn't help us to break the sub-quadratic we want to achieve. So let's go on to take 2. So what we do in take 2 is actually quite the same. I won't repeat on the algorithm, but what is a common method to reduce word complexity is to use committees. So what is a committee? A committee means that each step of the protocol is being executed by only a subset of the processes. So here I colored them purple, the committee. So this one is in the committee and this one is the committee, and the white one aren't. And the way processes elect themselves is also using VRFs. So this was also done in Algorand. We have validated committee sampling. So each process can locally, again, toss this random value And by the value, if it's below some threshold, he is elected and has a proof of its election. And if he's not, then it cannot pretend to be part of the committee. And what we do is that every process elected to the committee does exactly the same, exactly the same as it is done in take one. And any correct process that wasn't elected just sits silently and waits for the second phase. Then again, they sample themselves and see if they are part of the committee or if they aren't. And of course, we have this Byzantine process down here, which wasn't elected to the committee. And we don't want him to make honest processes speak for if they don't need to. So this is not a problem, because if he sends messages to all processes, any correct process would know not listening to him, as he does not carry a proof of his election. So this is take two. And what we do is we want to select the committees to be of size sufficiently small so we can reduce the word complexity. So what we do is the committee size, is the order of log n. So in each step, log n processes speak and they send their messages to all other processes because they cannot predict who will be in the committee in the next step. And we end up with the n log n word complexity, but we encounter a problem now. So when we said in any asynchronous protocol, we cannot wait for more than n minus f processes in order to move on. This is now no longer the case, right? Because I don't know how many people are in a committee, and I don't know how many Byzantine processes are in the committee. So for n minus f, I cannot wait because I might be waiting forever. So instead, what we do is we decide to wait for W processes. And I omitted what exactly is W and B, but B and W are parameters that we choose, so that using Chernoff bounds, we can prove with high probability that at least W processes are correct in each committee, and at most B processes are Byzantine. So that way I can be assured only with high probability that if I wait for W processes, I'll eventually hear from them.
Maybe you want to say that the order of log n.
Yeah. The committee itself is order of log n, and W and B are, of course, smaller than the size of the committee itself. So, okay, this helps us know how many to wait for. We can wait for W in the shared conver example, but it isn't enough to prove correctness of algorithms, because of course, if you know a little bit about consensus protocol, we also need some quorum intersections. So we show two other properties that states that every two subsets in a committee of size W will intersect by at least B+1 processes. So let's say if I hear from W in some certain step and Edith hears from another W, we both hear from common B+1 processes, and we both hear from at least one correct process. And another property is that every two subsets of size W and B+1 intersect by 1. So this helps us with the common core. And of course, these properties were proven with the high probability using Chernoff bounds. And if we use a constant number of committees in a protocol, these properties indeed will hold with high probability. So we remember that we need to take this into consideration when designing algorithms. Because if I'll start using a polynomial, I don't know how to pronounce it, so excuse me, polynomial number of committees, these properties will no longer hold. Okay, so we have in hand our shared Cohen, and we'll move on to the next abstraction called an approver. So an approver is abstraction that states the following. Each correct process PI proposes again an input value VI, but now it returns a set of values. It would be one or two values, we'll see that. And we hope with high probability for the following properties. So I'll call the procedure itself proof. If all correct processes invoke a proof V, then the only possible return value is the set of V itself. The second property is graded agreement, which states that if correct process Pi returns the singleton V and another correct process Pj returns the singleton W, then V must equal W. And of course, termination, if all correct processes invoke the proof procedure, then the proof returns, and it returns with a non-empty set at all of the processes. Okay, so how do we do that? I just now, if you can imagine, I tilted it in 90 degrees so we can make it all in one slide. We have again three steps, three communication steps, and you see different colors now, so we'll explain this as well. So it begins by every process, and now I'll say every process, but I actually mean the process that are elected to the first step committee, for example. So every process proposes its initial value, the one it invoked the prover with, and it sends it to all other messages. Then we have an echo step, which is there to boost the values. So a crucial thing that I didn't mention is that we will assume that in any approver invocation, there are at most two different values that could be initiated with. So each value, each process will either send init 1 or init 0, for example. Okay, it could be any two different values, but at most two different values are proposed in this step. So these ones, for example, will send init 1, this one will send init 0, and then we have an echo step. So in this echo step, what is done is that every process that is elected to the echo committee will echo the value it heard of, if it heard of it from at least B+1 processes in the first step. So if you can guess why there are two colors here, is because we have two initial different values and we need two different committees. So what's important when using a committees is that every process must be elected to a committee, speak once, and then he's done. We don't want him to take any further steps, because in this case, the adversary can corrupt him and ruin the whole game. Okay, so we want everyone to speak once, and we have a different committee here, one echoing, the green one echoing 0, and the purple echoing 1. Okay, and what can happen if there weren't two committees, then one process could have heard B+1 zeros and then heard B+1 ones. So we don't want any process to echo twice the same value, the different values, sorry. Okay, so we boosted the initial values. Then we have a different committee sending OK messages. So when do I send OK messages? I wait upon receiving W echo V on the same value V. It doesn't matter if it would be 0 or 1. When I hear W of the same value, I send OK on this value, and I won't send another OK in my life. I'll end my job here. And then here we have all processes receiving all messages. And if I heard W OK messages, and they're sent along with proofs of the echo messages, I return the set value that I heard of. So it is possible that I heard an OK0 message and an OK1 message, along with another W-2 OK messages. So I'll return the set of 0 and 1. If all the messages I heard was 1, so I'll return the singleton of 1. So the word complexity of this algorithm is n log quadratic log. I don't know mathematical terms. And the quadratic comes from the signatures being on the echo messages along with the OK. As I said, I send an echo, OK message along with enough signatures of echo messages I received. And I've seen there's questions. When you say with high probability. Okay, so it's hard for me to read now the terms exactly, but I mean, high probability means that the probability tends to 1 as n goes to infinity. I'll leave it there. Okay, so we constructed the shared Cohen and the prover, and now we only want to combine them to solve the Byzantine agreement we've discussed. So our protocol works in rounds, and each process in the protocol holds 2 variables, local variables, SI and decision I, where SI holds PI's current estimate of what is the decision value, and the decision I holds the decision. Okay, so once I make a decision, I set up a value for decision, and I won't change it again in the course of a run. So this is the algorithm, and it is quite simple. And on a brief look, you can see that there aren't any messages sent here. Okay, we'll only use the abstraction we've already described, but everything else is some local computation. So as I say, we execute in rounds, and we start by invoking the prover with our initial estimation. So if I take you back to the beginning, this is the point where everybody calls prove if he wants topping on his pizza or he wants it plain. So they all call the proof with high probability. It has termination property, so they all return. And it returns with some sort of set. So if this set is a singleton for some value, then this is the value I choose to propose next. Otherwise, there are more than 2 values. Say I heard that both people want topping or don't want topping, so I don't know what to propose, I propose bottom. Then on the next step, I'll locally, not locally because it's a shared procedure, but I'll toss the coin and obtain some value C. Okay, so it would be either 1 or 0, as we said, a binary shared coin, and I'll keep it in the variable C. And then I call the prover once again. So now, before I called it with my estimation, and now I call it with the proposition I made. So it's either one of the values or a bottom. So once again, we satisfy the assumption of at most 2 different values. And why is this assumption holds? Is because the graded agreement property. So if 2 correct processes return here with a singleton, it must be the same value. So we have either this value or a bottom. Then again, if I return what could be the outcome of this approver, it could be either V, the value that was chosen in line 5. So either V and bottom, or bottom. So if I hear V as a correct process, I choose to estimate, I choose this as my estimation value. And if I haven't decided yet, this is the point where I decide upon this value. Otherwise, if I only heard bottom, I have no idea what to do with my life, so I adopt the common coin value, okay, this bit that we received here. Otherwise, as I said, this is the case where I received both V and bottom, so I can choose to continue with my estimation as V, because I know intuitively, I know that some other process may have received this singleton and decided upon this value already. So I choose to continue with this one as my estimation value. So as I said, everything here is being computed locally, except for this to approve invocation and with high probability coin, which concludes the word complexity to the word complexity of these abstractions, which is n log quadratic n. Okay, so what we want to do.
Just you need to say why it executes a constant number of rounds, I guess.
Yeah, that's why I returned to the previous slide.
Okay.
So it would be a bit high level. I want to get into all the subcases, but let's start maybe with a good run. With everyone starts with the same estimation. Every correct process does not want topping on its pizza. So in this case, from the validity of the proof, both validity and termination, the return value would be only the singleton. We don't want topping, and no one else would return bottom due to the validity. Then we can all toss a coin for fun, but it won't help, it won't be used. We all call the second approver with the same V once again, because we all return it in the former step. And once again, we all return from validity with props, no topping on our pizza, and we can all decide, and that's it, we're done. So the problem is when there is more than one value, right? And what happens in this case? So we have the shared coin with a constant success rate, and we have all sorts of scenarios. So let's say, okay, so some correct process decided here, and some didn't. Okay, we have some other correct processes that didn't decide. And once again, from graded agreement, if one process decided, this means he received this singleton of V. So no other correct process could have received this singleton. Okay, if one, as we said, if one receives V and another correct process receive W, then V must be equal W. So the only possible case, if someone hasn't decided, is that it falls here under this category. And okay, so the first one decides on V, and the other continues with V. All other correct processes that haven't decided continue with V. And then, as I said before, we reach the round where all correct processes start with the same estimation. So this is also a good case. So where is the common coin comes to expression is here. Okay, so we can have processes both in this section and in this section. And in this case, once again, we know that every process that reaches lines 17 will reach with V and bottom, but it would be for the same V, because we only had two possible values in the prover. So all the correct processes that will adopt some value will adopt the same one, will adopt V. I mean, the one that will adopt it in this case, not the shared coin. And the other will use the shared coin. But since we have a constant success rate, we have this success rate rho. So with probability rho, all the correct processes that fail under this category will also decide upon V. Okay, so this is the worst case we can imagine, but since the coin has a constant success rate, we have a constant probability, so that they all continue on to the next round with the same estimation. And in this case, we've seen they're pretty much done. The other case, which is easier, is if they all fall here, so they only have a better probability. So we have two rows in order to move on with the same estimation. And once again, since the shared coin has a constant probability, constant success rate, we will terminate in the inverse of this probability, which will lead us to a constant expected number of rounds, leading once again to the constant expected number of committees we wanted, and the order of one expected time. So this is the word complexity. And to conclude, what we did here, we presented the first formalization of randomly sampled committees using cryptography, in a synchronous setting. So once again, it was done in Algorand, for example, but then the process could be sure that it heard from all the correct process in the committee. Why that? Because it waited on a timeout. Okay, so he knows that all correct processes in a committee have spoken, he heard from them, he received their message. But in our case, it is no longer true because we don't know how many processes do we wait for before moving on to the next step of the computation. Then we use this formalization to present the first sub-quadratic asynchronous shared coin and Byzantine agreement with high probability algorithms, which have expected the O tilde of n word complexity and O1 expected time due to the constant probability of the shared coin. And that's it. So if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.